I
Yeah.
saw a mink a few days ago.
No way.
Why?
Yeah, it took me quite a long time to work out what it was. It's a lot of time researching, but yeah.
Wow. Where was that?
Yeah, where?
It was at a local reservoir, but I go out on walks quite late at night, so it was at about 11 o'clock, so there was no one else around, so I just saw it running around, so yeah.
Wow. Amazing. So Lewis, we're recording, yeah?
Yeah, I think so.
We're recording. Should we kind of start?
Should we
Shall
pretend we have to do this thing where we pretend we haven't been chatting already? It's false fakey TV. Hi guys.
Hello.
Hi everyone.
Welcome. Welcome to the podcast. We have Michael and Andy here. Thank you so much, guys, for joining us for this podcast. We've already kind of talked about where we are and how we're enjoying the sun and our kind of nature spots. But do you guys want to start by telling everybody like how you guys know each other and how you guys met?
Yeah, I can explain if you want. So basically, I'm autistic, but I also have a really keen interest in supporting other autistic people. My sort of life goal is to make sure as many autistic children and young people as possible avoid the struggles my generation and previous generations have gone through. Sorry, that's the tram going past my house. so I've read lots and lots of books. I think, was it about 2 years ago when I saw Michael's book on autism and forest school? I read it and I just really, really loved it. Not just the content, but also I think Michael has like a perfect attitude towards autism, if that makes sense. So I just sent a message on LinkedIn saying how much I love the book. And then we started speaking after that, didn't we? So, yeah.
Yeah. No, and Andy got in touch with me at LinkedIn, and he linked me to his Facebook page, which it was called A Spectrum of Possibilities. It's called Autistic Life now. And so I checked that out, and I was like, wow, it was really good. I really liked it. And then last year, Andy was good enough to come along and talk at the Forest School conference. I don't know if you saw that, the national conference. And we've sort of stayed in touch. Andy's been helping me to try and communicate a bit better on social media since lockdown happened, because it's something I need some pointers with, I think.
Yeah, well, we've been really enjoying. I have anyway. Your social media posts, Michael, and Andy. I've since had a look at your page since Michael has told us about it. And especially in lockdown, as you say, when everyone's got a lot more time for looking at stuff, reading things, and sort of good, positive social media use, as opposed to just scrolling through random bits of gossip from your friends. Actually, reading stuff that is very informative and useful, and everything that I've read that you guys have linked to has made me think more and been really kind of interesting and thought-provoking. So I definitely recommend that anyone who's listening checks them out. So Michael, what's your social media page, your Facebook page, for those people who haven't seen it?
It kind of does what it says on the tin, really. It's called Forest School and Autism. Andy's been trying to explain to me how social media works, and I think I've frustrated him a little bit because I don't really get it. But what I do is I put up a lot of links to things that I think Forest School practitioners would be interested in, which would either be helpful or just interesting. So probably some things that we might mention over the course of the podcast now. If you look at the page, you might find links to learn more about it.
Yeah,
it seems like a really natural point in terms of just when everybody is perhaps doing some reflection and thinking about how they connect with other people and what they will do when they can go back out and can meet people again. And it seems quite natural to go, well, if we're reflecting on, do we shake hands? Why don't we reflect in all these other ways that we might not have? Gemma and I sometimes talk about having the time to get off the treadmill. You know, when we're trying to just keep up with everything that's happening, and we don't have the time or possibly the mental space to go, okay, I'm actually going to sit back and learn about, you know, what are some other people going through, or what's happening, how can I do this better? And so now that we've all paused and we're all looking at how can we do our I guess maybe one way of saying it is like, we're looking at how can we do our physical interactions in a better way in terms of hygiene and hand washing, all those things. And it's kind of like looking at this, having read your book, Michael, at this point, for me was a bit like, well, how can we review our social interactions on the same way? Am I just rambling now?
No, I think I've sort of been like a lot of forest school practitioners. Actually, I work for myself now, so my forest school practice is actually quite, from the point of view of my contact with other practitioners, it's quite solitary a lot of the time. So I've been using the time to kind of connect more with other people doing forest school and to kind of look more at forest school practice. What's always interesting for me about it is that ever since I first discovered forest school, I keep having these little light bulb moments. My background is in autism support, basically. That's entirely where I'm coming from. That's my way into forest school. That's where I've come from. And still, after doing forest school for years now, I still get light bulb moments where I see these kind of parallels when people are discussing forest school practice with a lot of the ideas in good autism practice. One of the things I've been reading about flow, and I've heard you discussing flow on the podcast. And flow, the place that I heard about flow was Dr. Damien Milton discussing monotropism, which is a theory about autism. And flow is a really big bit of that. I mean, if you're interested in it, if you go to the Facebook page, I think there's a link. There's also, if you go on YouTube, put in Dr. Damien Milton, you'll find him talking about monotropism and flow states. So all these little light bulbs they're still going off, which is what's kind of extraordinary about the way that the two things are converged for me, really.
Can I dig into that then for a minute? This idea that of flow, because from what my understanding is of flow is, that being kind of it's not in a cognitive sense, is it? You're kind of just doing and being, and you're completely in the actions that you're doing. But from what I have read, I can imagine that can be very difficult if you are it can be difficult to get to flow, I would imagine, if you are occupied with the task of any sort of masking or any sort of social adjustments that you're having to do. Would that be, Andy, would that be fair? Or
yeah, I think for me, I think being autistic sometimes is really, really difficult. I think the best way to describe it is it's like you're in a film, but everyone has a script of a film except you. So it looks like everyone's sort of got everything together and know what's going on, but you feel a bit sort of lost and bewildered most of the time, if that makes sense. But then
we don't know what's going on.
Yeah. Okay. but if you're in the right sort of environment, or the right people are around you, or you're in a place that works for you, then all of that sort of goes out the window. So that is when you can be in that environment where you truly flourish and thrive. It's different for different people. Like for me, like I said, I go on a walk every night around my local reservoir, and when I'm there, I feel really calm and sort of at peace, and I can process things thoroughly and think of new ideas and do stuff. Whereas during my day, I just spend my day trying to survive and to get to that moment, if that makes sense. I also have a coffee shop that I go to at 7 a.m. every morning, and I'm in my place of peace there while there's no one else in the shop, and I drink my latte, and it's about finding those places and those people where you can sort of be yourself and you are accepted, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Have you experienced forest school sessions, Andy? What led you to Michael's book?
At the time, I just loved reading about lots and lots of different things. I saw it recommended by someone on Twitter. So I've never been involved with forest school personally, but I have spent lots of time in nature. So when I was younger, I wasn't allowed to leave my street until I was about 14. But when I did, me and a group of friends went to a local park every single day. And we had like a sort of forest at the park. And we made like little dens, and we made rafts and went down the river and did all sorts of stuff every single day because we just really, really loved it. So that's sort of where my interest first came from. I haven't been involved with a forest school yet. I've asked lots of people if I can, or if I can help set something up. I haven't had any success yet. And lockdown did get in my way. But after lockdown, we're going to do the forest school.
On it. It sounds like you were doing your own, you were running your own forest school between you guys yourselves. You've got you meet all the criteria if you're like the same group of people in the same place over a long period of time, all the rest of it. You're just missing the like qualified leader person, and you're there.
I think that was one of the things, just to jump backwards slightly, Michael, is when you were saying that you were looking at, you sort of went from autism support into Forest School and looked at it and went, oh, this is all good autism support. When I was reading your book, I was definitely struck by the idea that I was kind of coming the other way. So most of my training and experience is in Forest School, and I have, from a teaching background, I would hesitant to say any substantial level of understanding of autism, but some. And I was looking at it from the point of view when as I was reading it, and it was, the bits about, get a sensory profile so that you know what sensory things does that person like and doesn't like. And I was going, well, I mean, that would be great if we just did that for all the kids. And it was, I wondered whether that was something you were conscious of when you were writing it, and Andy, maybe when you were reading it, that it actually, a lot of this stuff is not, I can't think of the word, some modifications, let's say, that you might put in place for different needs of children. You might go, the rest of the group don't need this, but this child or this learner does, and so it's beneficial. But all of the stuff that was in the book, it was like, well, that would benefit all of them, wouldn't it? I can't see a child that I would go, or a learner that I would go, well, I don't really care what your sensory needs are.
No, definitely. So, just so you know, so my full-time job is sort of as a SEND advocate. So, we advocate for disabled children and young people. And people get a bit frustrated because what usually happens is, if you have a disability, you're all sort of clumped together as like a bit of a disabled group, if that makes sense. But when you speak to everyone, they just say they want exactly the same as everyone else. They want to be in a group with people who aren't disabled as well. We just want the right support in place so that it works for them. So I actually run quite a few social groups where we have bits of support in place. So we always have a quiet room, we have different places and different support in place, and we do a sensory checklist. And then those sort of disabled children can access it and enjoy it. But everyone else also feels a lot less anxious and much calmer, and it works better for everyone. So yeah, what works for autistic children works for everyone.
Yeah.
And is that linked to does that in some way play into so my understanding, again, I'm treading very delicately, I don't know if you can hear me as I phrase everything, I'm trying. So my understanding is that because there is an autistic spectrum, that almost everybody just plots somewhere on that spectrum, and is that, do you think, one of the reasons that sort of support that goes in place is helpful for a lot of the population, because wherever you are, some support is always helpful?
I know a lot of autistic people aren't too keen on that sort of phrasing.
Okay.
It's similar to what people usually say is you can have back pain and feel sick, but it doesn't make you pregnant, if that makes sense. So you can have sort of traits that are similar to autism, so people do relate to autistic traits, but basically autism is the name for a certain way that brains are wired. I guess, I don't know, I guess, I don't know why it works for everyone, it just does, I don't know. Yeah.
Go on, Michael.
I think there's things in the Forest School approach which work for everybody. I mean, a lot of the benefits of Forest School for autistic people are the same benefits that come from the approach. It's to do with that connection with nature, but it's also, there's is it Sarah or Sarah Knight? I never know how to
Sarah.
Yeah.
Sarah Knight. So there's that phrase that's stuck. This is one of my light bulb moments, was when I read about the triangular trust.
Yeah.
Which is about that relationship between the environment, the practitioner, and the learner. And it's about establishing that trust, about valuing and having just encouraging those healthy connections between people that are coming from that place of kind of respecting how somebody else is.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is why, I mean, lots of Forest School practitioners have done great work with autistic people, and they've thrived at Forest School without the practitioners necessarily knowing a great deal about any kind of theory about autism. But they've established that relationship with that particular person. And of course, when we talk about autism in Forest School, it isn't a question of the neurotypical practitioner and the autistic learner. There's also autistic practitioners, practitioners who are parents of autistic children, who partners who, autistic people are at every level of Forest School. It's really important that we kind of appreciate that. What I would like to happen really is for more people who are involved with autism to kind of share what they know, particularly autistic people themselves, to kind of shape the way that practice develops, really, I think, in Forest School. That would be my ideal. I mean, I would quite like it if I could just sit and listen to autistic people telling me how to do Forest School all the time, really, to be honest. That would be my idea.
But isn't that sort of what we do with all learners, regardless of in that neurodiversity? We just kind of, that's one of the benefits of the child-led nature, isn't it? If we are always listening to our learners and going, okay, if you need this, great, that's what we can put in place, or if you need that, great, that's what we can do.
Definitely, I think it happens within groups and in the relationship between practitioners and their learners. I think it happens all the time, which is why I think Forest School works so well for quite a lot of autistic people who are learners. I think it'd be nice if we started to share that across the community and to share what you're learning with other practitioners, because the reason that I started to, I don't do anything different than the people. Lots and lots of people have delivered Forest School to autistic people ever since Forest School started. There's not, I'm not doing anything different. It's just that if you talk to Andy in a minute about some of the experiences that you hear about autistic children having in mainstream schools and in other sort of settings, people are still kind of needlessly having a really rough time. And so I'm kind of aware that if it doesn't take, I don't know, I basically just jumped up and down and said, I want to talk about this. I think we should all have a conversation to try to do better for neurodivergent people, basically. If we're going to involve ourselves in someone's life, then we should be doing our best to learn and understand how to do that in a positive way.
Yeah. Yeah, I was really struck. One of the things I wanted to bring up, actually, which links onto what you said just now, is that I've learned more about autism since becoming a Forest School practitioner 4 years ago than I taught for 9 years in secondary before that. And, we had some kind of, absolutely, I don't think there was a single bit of anything useful regarding autism on my teacher training course. Maybe that's because it was secondary rather than primary, I don't know. And then the kind of sort of like really, really inadequate kind of tack on kind of sessions that you might have a whole staff training day, and someone's going to come in for half an hour and talk about autism in a very just inadequate way. And then, of course, like a large percentage of the students I was teaching were autistic children, and I knew I was not, I just had no preparation and assistance in catering for those children. And at the time, probably I could have read a lot about it, and at the time I didn't, and now I have. But I think the reason why I have now, and why I've learned a lot more about it, is because there is actually space when you're delivering Forest School to actually cater for autistic people, whereas in mainstream school, I could have known as much as I know now about autism, but I would have left teaching sooner than I did, because you learn some stuff and then you go, but I can't do that. I cannot do that in the classroom at the moment in mainstream education. I cannot, if I have this sort of new understanding and awareness of sensory needs, for example, just to take one sensory need and have that awareness and go, well, okay, I cannot actually meet that need. I can do the best I can with an awareness of it, but I can't change the environment. I can't change the group size. I can't change the way that my lessons are supposed to be delivered because someone's telling me how to do that. Whereas at Forest School, you can absolutely cater for somebody's needs if you're aware of them and they feel that they can express them and you have an awareness of it. You can go, okay, this isn't working right now. I'm just going to stop and we can move to this place, or we can, do you know what I mean? In terms of group size and the environment and all the rest of it. And it really is that kind of holistic approach, isn't it? Which makes you realise, as you were just saying, what's the rest of the world doing? Why aren't we all, why don't we all have that?
And quite often having that space, I know for a lot of children that Forest School is their thing that happens inside of the school setting. So it's like one afternoon a week or one day a week or whatever that might be. But having that integrated into the school system, I have seen be very beneficial, because then the Forest School practitioner who has free reign to go, I will make this as personalized as I possibly can and meet every need that I see arising, can feed back to a teacher who, I think a lot of teachers would, like you say, Gemma, would love to meet every need that they can see arising, but are trapped by a system or by limited time or by funding or whatever it is. So having someone like a Forest School teacher who can go, oh, do you know what? I can meet every need, and then can feed back a bit and go, have you tried putting this little bit in the classroom, or have you tried taking that back? I guess, yeah, Andy, was that your kind of experience in state education, that needs weren't met or that they couldn't be met? Is that?
I think the main difference between sort of Forest School and education is the approach people take. I have two different terms which I like to use. One is the sort of outside-in approach. This is where people have their expectation of what they want you to do and how they want you to be, and they try and mold you into that. But if you're autistic, for example, it's like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. It just causes sort of difficulties for the person, like mental health difficulties and things like that. So I run a Facebook page about autism, and I get lots of autistic adults messaging me every single week who are really, really struggling, because every time you tell them that, you know, every time people, I don't know, one example is people are sensitive to sound, but people say you should just cope with that, or if likes it too bright, you should just cope with that. Every time someone does something like this, it's, you're sort of learning that who you are is not okay. So people learn to sort of hate themselves and really, really struggle when they get older, as well as while they're in school. So what I really believe in, which I think Forest School does as well, is a sort of inside out approach, which is rather than getting someone to become a certain way, it's about seeing the world from their point of view and making things work in a way which works for them, which is why the child-led approach is absolutely perfect. And for me, what I think would be really useful is getting that inside-out approach and embedding it more into school, education, and everywhere else. That's why, like you said, having Forest School as part of the school week, that's really useful, because when people realise that approach works, then it can start to have more of an impact on the actual classroom.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Can I ask, I guess it's a question for both of you. I know for a lot of practitioners, they, and I have had this sort of internal question of myself, because Forest School does work really well for neurodiverse learners, and because it's meets a lot of needs, that but almost by hook or by crook, you can sort of end up down a path where Forest School is seen as only a provision for, you know, I've been to some schools where the only 4 children that do Forest School are the kids that will throw a chair at someone if they don't like the lesson, or, do you know what I mean? So is there anything that needs to be put in place to kind of balance that, to say that it is Forest School for all, you know, it's a beneficial thing for all learners, not just those with neurodiversity?
Something in that idea of the fact that it's often the children who, it's not necessarily that they're struggling with school, it's the fact that the school is struggling with them.
Yeah.
And they will get the funding to go, and also because the school isn't coping with them, they'll be, it's almost like, well, we don't know what to do with these people, we're going to send them to the woods. I don't agree with that at all, because, well, I don't want to upset people here. This might be a little bit controversial for some people.
It's okay, I upset people all the time. Go for it.
Okay, this is totally personal viewpoint. Okay, my own practice, I would never describe as an intervention or as a therapy. I would say it will bring all these benefits to someone, but like we've already discussed, it will bring benefits to anybody, really. The reason that I wouldn't use that language, despite the fact that, you know, there is a therapeutic value, and also you may be carrying on things in a holistic way from other places, which are interventions or therapies. You may be working together with speech and language therapists, occupational therapists, partnership working. Forest School in and of itself, though, I personally wouldn't choose to use that language. The reason that I wouldn't is, I was reading a book, actually, that put it really well. There's this great book called Autism. I can't remember what the sort of subtitle is, but it's by Francesca Happe and someone else. and she talks. There's just this kind of paragraph that again really jumped out at me about how a lot of autistic people and kids particularly, their experience is everything they do is a therapy or intervention. So if they like to go trampolining, that's rebound therapy. Now you have to look at what is the message you're giving somebody. If everything you go and enjoy and do well at and engage with is a therapy or an intervention, what's the underlying message of that is that, you know, you're broken and you need to be mended all the time. There should be some places you can go. You know what, you're just part of a community. You're accepted. And you have to, I mean, sometimes I think we can get very earnest. But actually, if you look at forest school practice, and if you hang out with a lot of practitioners, fun is like a key element. Playfulness and fun is a key thing. And actually having fun together and playing together, even though it might take a bit of effort to kind of understand and accommodate different perspectives and just different kind of neurological perspectives, that connects us, you know, and that's a really good thing. And for me, that's kind of should be at the heart of everything. I mean, when Andy came and spoke at the Forest School conference, the other guys who came were from Stay Up Late in Brighton. And Stay Up Late came from a punk band called Heavy Load that was set up by some support workers and the people they supported, and it was completely led by the people they supported, and they were brilliant. They're not about anymore, but Paul, who came and spoke, he was one of the musicians in Heavy Load, and it was life-changing. Do you know what I mean? It was absolutely life-changing. And Stay Up Late and all these kind of political campaigns around rights, you know, kind of people's rights who are living in residential care, who have been supported. These huge things came out of it, which has been a massive benefit to like thousands of people. But if you actually look at what was happening at the seed of that, it wasn't something very earnest. It was people having fun. You know, it was being in a punk band and just having fun and just doing what other people do. And that is where all of my practice comes from. That is what the influence, that's what the ethos, that's where my ethos came from. It was completely inspired by the things that were happening then, really.
Yeah.
And so when we go into the woods, we're creating our own little community. I mean, we all kind of carry around our narratives, don't we? For a lot of forest school practitioners, I think there's a little bit of Robin Hood with us all. Do you know what I mean? It's like the things in the land are not going well. The power is what have you. For me in social care, for other people maybe in teaching, isn't going the way we want it to. And so we go off into the woods and create, you know, you have the opportunity in our little groups to create these little utopias. You know, there's something quite utopian, I think, about some of the little communities we create. And so for me, I don't want to use that kind of language about forest school. I want people to just come and be just be accepted for who you are. The woods don't care where you are on any kind of, you know, constructed spectrum or whatever. The woods don't mind where we are, as long as we're going and we're learning how to have good relationships with one another and with nature.
I think that's go on, Gemma.
I think there's also a negative effect upon the people who aren't included in those groups. So as you're saying, you wouldn't describe it as an intervention or a therapy, but often, you know, forest school is given to a smaller group of learners who, you know, school can't cope with, whatever. There's also a detriment to the general population when you go, well, okay, these people are allowed to do this because it's a therapy and it's an intervention, but we're going to just have fun and we're going to have we have meaningful connections in a really learner-led way, but that's not for the general population because they've got to live up to this other standard. And that was one of the things that really kind of irked me when I was teaching, was that there were so many divisions drawn between children and learners. It was like, well, here's the group that is gifted and talented, and here's the group that is a nurture group, and here's the group that, you know, and they're not allowed, this is the pathway they're going to follow. And often the pathway that the nurture group would be following would be, as we're saying, in a way beneficial for all of these students. But it's like, well, no, you guys aren't allowed to have fun, play games, make meaningful connections with each other, because you guys have got to meet this academic standard, which is what we're really aiming for here. You can't waste your time having fun, playing and making good social connections. That's only for the ones that can't do the academic stuff. And I was just like, that's insane. Like, it should be the other way around. It's like, I don't know, you know, what do you need to survive in life? We need to be happy and grounded, and to be able to make you know, good relationships, and have confidence in our own abilities and practical skills and all the kind of stuff that you could argue that Forest School would provide. But I completely agree with you, and it's seen as a kind of like specialist intervention for people who don't fit the mold. I think that's really dangerous about what you're saying to those people who aren't then included in that group.
And an intervention. Oh, go on, Bundy.
I was going to say, I think you can also flip it the other way too, that where what happens is you're one of the few young people who get to go and do this extra activity, and when you do that, you know it's because they think you're disruptive, or because you have a problem in the class, and that has a negative impact on you. For me, it's like Michael said before, for me, in an ideal world, it would be everyone going out to Forest School, because there's so much, rather than knowing you're being singled out because you're disruptive, instead it can be a really good opportunity to say, while I do struggle in the classroom, here's an environment where I do truly flourish, and the people around me are there while I'm doing that as well. So it isn't me who's a problem, it's the environment, because with the exact same people, I'm successful here, even when I'm not in the classroom. And there's a lot of learning from that. The other thing I really, really believe in is the word acceptance, which is sort of accepting people's differences, and all of the strengths and weaknesses that come with it. And Forest School is one of the best places to be able to explore that with people, I think. So, yeah.
Yeah, I love the in your book, Michael, I really love the kind of the positivity that you talk about a lot in the book. Not so you're sort of from the point of view of meeting learners where they are, and working with the person that you see, and looking at what people can do rather than what they can't. And I liked what you said about not wrapping people in cotton wool and not challenging people at all. But you also give a very positive approach, which I've liked, to practitioners, and saying, you know, we're all going to make mistakes sometimes. Don't worry too much about that. You know, learn and grow from the mistakes that you make when you're in your approach. And I was interested in how you were talking about kind of planning activities for sessions, and being aware that obviously some activities are going to be a challenge for some learners, like you described your own experience of having to find different coloured leaves.
Yeah.
And that we shouldn't shy away from offering activities that are going to be a challenge for different learners, but making sure you've got a balance there and choice. Do you want to just explain a little bit about that? Because that really made me reflect on my own practice.
It's something that is one of the great things about Forest School, is that the groups that I have now, everybody comes along with a support worker, has a autistic spectrum diagnosis, and often other sort of co-occurring diagnoses. And everyone is very, very different to one another. Just because somebody shares on the face of it a diagnosis, people, almost each separate person can be doing something very different at Forest School, which you can't really do. I mean, I don't come from an educational background, but, you know, certainly when I went to school, that wasn't going to happen in the classroom. You weren't all going to, you know, I couldn't suddenly decide I'm going to do woodwork in the middle of my maths lesson. You know, if we were having a discussion in English, I couldn't sort of go off and do something else that I could get more from. So, I mean, I think the example I used in the book was an article that John Cree wrote, where he had a group of people who were doing this. One group of the kids in this session were negotiating this game, and the whole thing was this great big negotiation around the rules, and, you know, it was a great social interaction. Two other boys were making a chair together and working together to do it, and then I think there was a girl who was making a hammock. And so it's the fact that you can individualize things like that, and that's one of the strengths of Forest School for me, actually, is the fact that everyone doesn't have to be doing the same thing. It's all of these things work very well. It's also the fact that you can see where you can meet someone where they are on that day, in that moment. That's one of the things which actually if you support people and you can do that in someone's house, but often when you go out into the community, it can be quite hard to do that because you can't control the environment really anymore. And a lot of activities are about a product, aren't they? You're meant to be achieving whatever it is within this time, you know.
Yeah.
Whereas forest school, actually, if someone needs to, they can come and just look in the fire for the morning if that's where they are and that's what they need to do, and that's okay.
Do you think it's it's a benefit that in forest school, because it is transparently learner led, that it's possibly one of the few places where children are empowered to make their own adjustments and their own adaptations, where in a classroom you might, like you say, you might not be able to put your hand up in the middle of an English class and go, would you mind if I did this as a painting, because I think I would get more out of it that way. But in a forest school session, you could, you know, I think all of our I would hope that all of our children that come to our sessions would happily go, can I go and do this with green rope instead of red rope? And we would go,
even stronger than that, just go, no, don't want to. Quite often, like Lewis and I have a little thing of like little interaction that we have between ourselves when one of us kind of playfully kind of makes an invitation to a child or a group and goes, should we do this? Or like, you know, playfully tries to engage someone in a game. And sometimes it's just like a flat, like, no. And sometimes it's just a facial expression, which is just like, I have absolutely zero interest in what you're doing. And like, that's completely fine. That's, and you know, but it's,
and
like,
that's the roots of self-advocacy for a lot of people.
Yeah.
You know, it's being able to say no is actually quite and be listened to.
Absolutely.
And respected when you say it. That's actually a really important thing to learn. And
it still hurts. It still hurts though.
Honestly, I get it too. I promise you.
I find it hilarious because it's almost like the more enthusiastic I am about something, because you as a leader are also, you know, it's a level playing field. You're a participant as well. You're a learner too. So it'll be a moment where I'm like, hey guys, check this out, I find this really cool, and everyone else is like, no, zero interest. Okay, but the more enthusiastic I am about it, the flatter the response sometimes. It's just funny. But yeah, I really liked what you said about self-advocacy, and you said in the book that, you know, no learner is really too young to be self-advocating and expressing their opinions and needs, and I thought that was a really useful thing to remember. And
Andy, is that something that your advocacy kind of works towards? Is getting people to, from what I can see of your Facebook page and the things that are going on there, it looks to be a lot of kind of sort of just encouraging people to just almost put their hand up and go, oh, I need it like this, or actually this is the way it's going to work, rather than going, I'll just knuckle under and I'll mask and I'll do whatever.
Yeah, 100%. I think in terms of education itself, I sometimes get a bit confused because it's, I don't know, people have to sort of sit perfectly still and listen all day. You have to put your hand up to speak, and children have all these expectations. But when you're an adult, you have much lower expectations than these children do. So why have you put up to this standard? If I'm in a work meeting, I can go out to go get a drink. I can go to the toilet whenever I want to. I can. You're just expected to do certain things and not question it, and things always have to be the same way. And that's the way you're brought up when you're in education, which is completely different to how it is when you're actually an adult. The problem with Ben is, if that way of working doesn't work for some people, like it doesn't for some autistic children and some other neurodivergent children, that has a really negative impact on the rest of your life. It has a really long-term impact because there's a lot of sort of damage and trauma that comes along with being forced to do what they're supposed to, which, as I said, isn't what real life is actually like anyway. But
so yeah, I completely agree with you. So what kind of preparation for life is that supposed to be? I mean, is that a hangover from you know, Victorian times where education was about be quiet and listen to your boss because you're going to be working in, you know, industrial stuff? Or
is it Aristotle who said education isn't the filling of a vessel, it's the lighting of a fire? And I think that kind of sit still, listen is the viewpoint possibly of filling a vessel, because you can maximize for scale, can't you? If you can get 30 vessels to sit down entirely still and you can talk at them, then in your head you can be filling that vessel, but if one of them's a different shape, then you're not filling them all the same. Do you know?
Yeah.
Just because we kind of sort of wandered into the sort of school life, and Michael, you've put a few things up recently about PDA.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you could talk about how those two things tie together.
PDA and autism.
Yeah, and how that sort of manifests and presents in school life, and what we can be doing as practitioners.
So PDA, pathological demand avoidance, sometimes it's called extreme demand avoidance because people don't like the word pathological being used. It's not recognised as yet, unless it's changed very recently, as an official diagnosis. Sometimes it will be described as like a demand avoidant profile. PDA, I know from talking to quite a lot of forest school practitioners, a lot of people who find themselves, as we spoke earlier, being funded to go to the woods because they're not coping very well with mainstream school, to the point where they're not attending mainstream school often. They're refusing to attend mainstream school. And basically, PDA is, I think the NAS certainly were including it as part of the autistic spectrum, but it actually presents quite differently to a lot of the other kind of autistic profiles.
Yeah.
Basically, it's anxiety driven, and it's resisting any level of demand at all, to the point where it really causes you quite significant problems kind of functioning in your life. People will often kind of create a comfort zone for themselves, which they'll then defend. Do you know what I mean? And it'll kind of, it's very kind of self-restrictive ultimately, and that's kind of my experience of it. You probably, I've supported a couple of people who've had sort of PDA profile, and the sort of techniques and things that you would use are very different to what you would use typically with autistic, and sometimes kind of counterintuitive as well. I don't want to use examples because of confidentiality, but it's. I know I was talking to Deb Miller, Haller Wood, about it, and it sounded like she was doing really good work with some people. And it's almost like if something is presented as a demand, it's going to be resisted. So you almost have to kind of go around the edges. But again, coincidentally, I actually read, I think it was an NAS PDA page the other day that I was looking at, and they were describing a PDA hub that they had in one of their specialist schools. And again, I had one of those light bulb moments I'm always talking about, where they were pretty much describing a learner-led approach.
Right.
So it was allowing the child to choose. It was working on people's interests. Anything that someone had as a special interest, was very passionate about, that would be incorporated into how things were presented to them. And it was also a lot of negotiation with the child about when should we do this, when's the best time for you to do this. And so a lot of those learner-led approaches, again, mainstream school often ends up being, people just end up not attending, to be honest, because they can't cope with they can't cope with that level of demand. Even just getting out of bed at this time in the morning, if you say, I want you to do this, then it's almost just like an automatic reaction that it's not going to happen. I don't know, have you read much about PDA, Andy?
Yeah, I think there's two sort of things here. One thing is there is PDA itself, which is where your sort of fight or flight response is activated with any demand that happens. But another thing that's quite common is sometimes people say someone has a PDA profile, but that might not actually be the case. Reason for that is there are so many things that cause PDA is basically really high anxiety, which then becomes sort of refusal or a fight response when you get demands. But then if you have really high anxiety anyway, because there's then that's also going to give a similar demand avoidance type presentation, if that makes sense. It just, off the top of my head, a lot of autistic children are bullied. A lot of people don't actually know what their diagnosis means, so they feel a bit sort of alien or sort of out of the world, if that makes sense. You have all your sensory differences that people don't understand and people rarely accommodate for. And there's lots and lots of, there's so many different things. A lot of autistic people struggle with friendships, so can feel lonely quite a lot of the time. All of these things then cause anxiety, so which then can result in lots and lots of demand avoidance. The other sort of aspect that feeds into that quite a little bit is a lot of autistic people don't really sort of believe in authority. They believe in sort of, I know for me personally, I really struggle with when people tell me what to do. I've had line managers in the past where I've really reacted negatively with, even if you have to do something really simple, then sometimes I can really struggle with it. Not because, just because, I don't know, we don't work together very well, if that makes sense. For me, it's all about your individual relationship with that person for whether or not you're able to do what they ask you to do. That isn't PDA, that's just autism as a whole. So my line manager at my current job is absolutely amazing, so I can do anything she tells me to. But there are some people I work with and who I come across where even if they ask me a really simple task, I really, really struggle with it, just because, I don't know, it just, my brain just tells me I have to not do it. And I've had to learn so hard to stop resisting, if that makes sense. I don't know.
I was
yeah.
going to ask you that, Andy, if that's a, I guess you can only answer for you personally, but whether that's something that is fixed and unchanging. You know, my relationship with that person will never be a point where that person could ask you to do something, or is it something that you need to work on, or they work on, or something you do together? Because I can imagine that would be similar for a lot of, you know, forest school leaders who'd be listening to this and thinking, if I have a learner who has that relationship with me, is there anything I can do to bridge that?
Yeah, I think it changes, and it's all about sort of, for me, I've spent so long trying to work it out. I think the main thing that, I think this is the answer. It's all about that person's attitude and their approach and their beliefs, if that makes sense. For example, a few years ago, I came across a head teacher. I'm not going to say who it was, but she always seemed very like rude and cold when I was talking to her, if that makes sense. So whenever she would ask me to do something, it instantly lighted that I really don't want to do it type mindset, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But a few years later, I saw it in a meeting, a professionals meeting, where she was talking quite a lot about how much stress her school was put under and how much she really wants to help young people, but it really wasn't working out because of the current situation. And after that, it was like a bit of a switch, and I suddenly found a lot more respect for her than I had before. And then it was easier going forward. So I think I don't know, I always say autism's a lot of things are a bit like a light switch, where you come to an absolute conclusion about something based on the current information. So for me, I was completely put off that person. It turned out I was wrong, and that person wasn't how I thought they were, if that makes sense. And then once I found out more, it then switched towards, oh, actually, she is someone who has really good values and good beliefs, so I can respect her a lot more.
So would you say that in order to build that relationship, you just needed to know more about them? They just needed to share more so that you understood them more?
It depends, because if they shared more and I didn't like what they shared, that might not be the case, if that makes sense. Yeah. But for me, it's just people's beliefs and their values and why they're doing what they're doing is what's really important. So, for example, the people I get on with the most at work are people who are there first and foremost for the children. They're not in it for money and to make a living. Their first priority is to support children in the best way they possibly can. When people have that same sort of value that I have, then it's a lot easier to sort of have a strong bond with them, and it then makes you less resistant, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I was reading some of the stuff, I think it was in a document that you shared, Michael, recently, which was a document, was it originally Spanish perhaps, and it was written from the point of view of autistic people, explaining what life was like for them. Do you know the document I'm talking about?
I'm not sure. I spend all day reading.
Oh, sorry. Okay, I'll try and find it. But one of the interesting things on there was about empathy, which kind of just made me think, Andy, as you were saying about that, gaining that understanding of this head teacher's life and having that empathy with her. And in this document, it was sort of saying that one of the common misconceptions of autism is that autistic people lack empathy. They lack the capacity for empathy, and actually, if anything, it's the reverse. And I found that really interesting. Would
It's
either of you
often,
guys like to talk about that?
That one.
Yeah, understanding the autistic mind.
Yeah.
Number
oh
one.
yeah,
There's no
yeah,
classically made. That's a group of artists. They have a website. It's a group of autistic advocates who write sort of articles, information, with the aim of helping professionals and parents understand the lived experience of autism more.
Yeah.
So I recommend checking out the website. It's got lots of amazing stuff on it.
Yeah.
But in terms of empathy, this is quite a hot topic, because people always say that autistic people have no empathy, and that's just completely untrue. And there's quite a few reasons why people might say this. The first one is, just as you'll know, autistic people have lots of sensory differences, so you can be under or oversensitive to each of your senses. One sense which isn't talked about that much is one called interoception. So this is a process of understanding your internal bodily sensations and then translating that into bodily or emotional states. So if my belly's rumbling, that means I'm hungry. If I'm shaking and my heart's beating fast, that might mean I'm anxious. For most people, it's a sort of natural thing to sort of naturally understand what emotions you're feeling, or whether you're hungry and stuff like that. For autistic people, there's quite a common thing that happens, which is called alexithymia, which is where you have the internal bodily sensations, but your brain doesn't automatically tell you what they mean. So it's a bit like a maths equation where you have to work out sort of beating heart plus shaking legs equals what, and you need to work out what all your emotions mean manually. So that can make emotions very, very confusing. And then if you mix that with being over or undersensitive, this can mean if you're oversensitive, you suddenly feel these really, really strong internal impulses. You have no idea what they mean. So it can become so overwhelming you go straight into meltdown mode, or you dissociate from it so that you don't have to sort of deal with it that much. So it looks like you have no empathy when actually you're feeling it so strongly that you just don't know how to respond. Then there's the other situation where you can be undersensitive, so you feel the sensations, but because you're not picking them up that well, you might not respond straight away. But then it might not be until you're in meltdown mode and you're in sort of fight or flight response that you then realise that you had emotions building up, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Is this something that you would say gets easier as autistic people get older, that they're possibly more able to say, I have the feelings, but it's harder to interpret? Whereas, I mean, all children, I think, would have difficulty labeling their emotions to begin with, or they have difficulty labeling what their feelings mean, which is why, you know, at a basic level, we need to remind almost all children to put a coat on when it's cold, or to, you know, you're getting quite hot and you're sweating, maybe you need to take off all 15 jackets that you're wearing. And is that something that gets easier with age? And is that something is it achievable for younger children to have that reflection?
I would say you just learn with experience. And one example is, when I feel anxious, I get a really uncomfortable feeling in my chest here. I had no idea that it was anxiety. I sometimes thought that I was having like a heart problem or something like that. But I was in CBT when I was 20 years old at university. But at that time, I always thought you feel anxiety in your stomach. But it was this therapist who told me, actually, sometimes you feel it in your chest too. And that's when I made that connection. So now I know whenever that uncomfortable feeling comes, that means I'm anxious, whereas I didn't know previously. But some things are easy, but some things are just as hard, because some feelings can be very simple. For example, feeling hungry feels similar to having low blood sugar. So sometimes it's different. It's difficult to distinguish between the two of them. I guess just the more you sort of talk about your material sensations and learn to link them to emotions, the easier it gets. That makes sense.
Michael, is that something you would suggest then, that leaders kind of, or people working in that kind of sector, just, is it a bit of that, you know, just have a go, just label what you think they might be experiencing, you know, kind of that, like, oh, it looks like you might be feeling anxious, or it looks...
Well, the key often is partnership working. And for things like anxiety, often there'll be indications that someone's anxiety is rising. And if you have spoken to teachers or TAs or support workers or family members, or, you know, whoever else may be involved with this person, or it might be something you reflect, and it's really the question of your own observation. So, for instance, somebody that I know who, if they're beginning to become anxious, they will scratch their head like that. It's like a tell in a poker game. And if you've built that relationship with somebody, you understand what they're communicating. So although they might not be able to kind of say, I'm getting anxious, and you see that first sign, you'll see those first little indications that something's not quite right. And then you can start to put things in place to try to kind of to help somebody with whatever the cause of their anxiety is, or to kind of de-escalate them, and or find them a space where they can calm. It's the key to a lot of these things is in that relationship. This is why I think often people will kind of ask you a question and they want you to sort of say, well, you just do this, this and this. But I mean, there's a saying, like, if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. It's such a, you sometimes hear about the spectrum isn't big enough. Sometimes you hear about people talk about the spectra or the autisms, or my favourite one is the autistic constellation, to give you an idea of kind of how individual the points are of where different people are. And it's that key. It's in that relationship with somebody, and there's not necessarily, the only shortcuts are to kind of the biggest shortcuts, if possible, to talk to the person themselves and to see what you're doing. But beforehand, if you can get any kind of information, if somebody's mum tells you something, or the teacher or whoever else is involved with that person, and then you build on your own observations as your relationship builds, and as hopefully your trust builds. That's the key for me, really. It's in that there's no shortcut to that relationship. You have to get in there. And
well, that's true. That's true of everybody, isn't it? That is,
yeah, exactly.
That is the human experience.
Yeah.
Sorry, Michael, can you just tell us a little bit about, there's a bit in the book where you described that you were talking about recognising many strengths that autistic people have, and one of those strengths being a bottom-up approach to things and not making assumptions, actually working with data and then drawing conclusions after that. And you were kind of saying that actually a lot of neurotypical people, or people who might be working with autistic learners, find that quite tricky, and that actually almost kind of leads on from what we were just saying about kind of not making assumptions. And can you explain? I put that quite badly, but
that idea comes from The Autistic Brain by Temple Grandin, and it talks about the fact that it's talking specifically about sort of scientific research and academic research, and about the fact that they found that some autistic people made much better researchers because they actually looked for the patterns in the data, rather than starting from a hypothesis and then trying to kind of shoehorn the data to support the hypothesis they'd kind of already decided on. And so you actually get a much truer picture. This is something that I kind of wonder. I mean, I can't know for sure exactly what anyone else's experience is, but even from the point of view of just going into the woods with people, some of the people who I work with, who their kind of experience in the woods, or the way that they interact with the environment around them, is very, very sensory driven in an idiosyncratic kind of way. It's it's not the typical, but they're having a very direct interaction, conversation almost, with the natural environment that we're going into. And I sometimes wonder if their experience is actually more direct in that moment of nature. Not all the time, and I don't ever want to over romanticize this at all, but certainly they're often more present in the woods. I'll be worrying about what someone's doing over there and what's happening at the next session, and what I've got to do before I pick my kids up from school or whatever. Whereas some of the people are often really very directly connected to the environment in that moment. Well, that's what it kind of looks like from where I'm standing.
Yeah, and I think that's something that when I was reading the book, kind of made me think, well, yet again, it's kind of reminding us to, you know, if we can try and adopt that approach when we're interacting with our learners, instead of kind of going, oh, well, okay, these people have got these needs, and so I need to do this, that, and the other, instead of actually just having a hypothesis and making a sort of generalized wash of like, oh, I'm making my sessions, you know, autism friendly, actually starting with a bottom-up approach and actually looking at what learners are giving you, rather than going, okay, well, autism, that means this, and I must do this.
It's more like saying we are trying to make our sessions Jeff friendly, or we are trying to make our sessions, you know, Michael friendly, or whatever. You know, I think that's one of the things, isn't it, about Forest School that keeps us as leaders interested, because it's not just like, oh, you know, in teaching it might be seen that, oh, if you add a quiet space in the corner of the room and you make sure all the displays look like this, then you have achieved, you know, autism acceptance, tick in the box, it is done. But with Forest School, I think everybody innately understands that it, you know, the sessions you did last year, or even, you know, the sessions you did last week that made it. So I'm going to say Michael, because then I'm not in any way using a name. No, I don't know. If we made it Michael friendly last week, that might not be what makes it Michael friendly this week. But we're all okay with that. We're not holding on to it and going, you know, but no, this is what it says, and this is what. And I think that came across in your book very strongly, was that it's, you know, all of this is maybe stuff to look out for, but in no way is this the playbook. You have got to the end and completed it. Here's your certificate.
I'm really sorry to interrupt, but if you can hear like strange sounds, that's my cat. She's just come into the room and she's meowing and purring very close to the monitor. So those sounds they're not coming from me. That is Luna. Sorry.
I kind of think a little bit of theory can be a dangerous thing sometimes, because you can kind of shoehorn the individual in front of you into the little bit of theory, and they don't necessarily fit it very neatly. I've supported autistic people for nearly 20 years, and out of the people I've ever been paid to support, nobody has ever been interested in how much I know about autism in a general way. No one's ever asked me, or the people I've supported have never asked me, never shown any interest. What they want is for me to have that relationship with them. You often see people doing great work who don't necessarily know a lot about general sort of underpinning theories or ideas behind their practice. So it is all about the individual person. I mean, that's the whole message of all of it, really. And I mean, I don't know. That's kind of. I do think there can be tensions though in Forest School practice that can make it difficult for some autistic people, children, at a Forest School session. And you know, I think maybe, I don't know what you think about structure. That's always a question, really. I think in Forest School is that how flexible are we with our idea of what Forest School is? If you insist that you have a very kind of unstructured. I think, Andy, did you go to a workshop where a lot of people at the conference, where a lot of people were sort of very much against the idea of structure when the person running the workshop?
Yeah, name and shame them. Who was it? No,
don't name and shame them.
I'm joking.
No, please don't.
But being anti-structure, what, in any way, they just didn't want there to be any structure to the sessions.
I believe that. So I have a really good memory, so I might be wrong, but I remember at a workshop I went to, they were saying that you should, when you're working with sort of disabled children, young people and autistic children, you should always have a very, very set structure, which is exactly how you should do it and what should happen. But I personally disagree with that, and most people who did disagreed as well. I think my personal most important thing for supporting autistic people is never just have the what. Don't just say what you do or what the plan is for each session, because that in and of itself is a demand. So you have people who have demand avoidance or who are anxious, they're going to have a negative reaction to it. One thing that's really important is telling people the sort of why they want to do the what instead, and then working together on that thing rather than just having things in place. It's quite interesting. So I've met people in schools, even in Forest School practice, where they say they have a perfect autism-friendly environment. We have the quiet room. We have all the best support we possibly need. But because it wasn't planned with the young people, they don't really sort of believe in it as much, if that makes sense. Whereas even if you tell a young person, what do you want to do when things get overwhelming? What do you want to do? What would be your option if you're not enjoying a certain activity? And they come up with some solutions together. Even if they're the same solutions that you had anyway, it means so much more to them, and it's
ownership, isn't it?
When we do it, yeah. Sorry, I forgot what the original question was. I just went off on a tangent, but
no, we're just rambling.
Yeah.
That was really interesting what you're saying, but it was about structure, and that is something that I have also heard a lot about, and that seems to be almost like, one of the kind of check boxes on thinking about your sessions and whether they are inclusive is like, is there a clear structure? And it's about like visual timetables and making sure that everybody knows what's going on at all times. But I have to say, I have also felt that tension and thought, okay, well, I should be doing this. I really should be doing this. But then often that does backfire, I find.
And sometimes there's a difficult thing, isn't there, where I wouldn't go as far as to say it's like adult knows best, but I know from experience there have been things where, particularly with younger children, if you were to at a quiet moment ask them how they feel about, or does the visual timetable, just as an example, or does the visual timetable help you? And a 5-year-old kind of sees no real value in it and goes, no, I don't really look at it, or they just kind of pass it off. But that if you took it away, they would have real difficulties. So I guess, Mikey, you were talking about, sorry, I can't remember the phrase you used. Was it partnership working or co-creating?
Yeah, partnership working.
And it's, I guess, is there an element there of trying to work out what's unsaid if you haven't got if your learner isn't, I'm kind of waffling in a way, but you know what I mean?
I think, sorry, go on.
With partnership working though, like the central partner is always the learner themselves, or the person being supported, or the student, or the participant, whatever title the person's going to have. But the person is at the centre of it, they are the most important partner. And the other people, if there are other people involved in their support or education, it's just a question of sharing, communicate with one another, and so that you know the things that you need to know about that person. If someone has a massive phobia about, wasps, you probably want to know about that before you go to the woods, just so that you're aware of what can go on if there's a wasp flying around and things like that. It's just a basic, but I mean, you'd ask that with anybody, wouldn't you? Sort of say, I ask questions about kind of sensory things and about communication needs, but with any session, you often, before someone comes along, you'll send out a sheet and you want to know what someone's allergies, is there any medical things that you need to know about, any dietary things or religious things that you need to know about before someone comes along. But yeah, partnership working, I think, is quite important. But I mean, I'm coming from this kind of social care angle.
Do you think, Andy, there's a thing, you were talking about structure and saying how, if you're explaining why we're doing it this way. So, the very basic approach to making sessions inclusive, you might be told, oh, make sure that there's a really clear structure in place. But then for a lot of learners, that's going to feel very authoritarian and very like, well, I'm telling you that's what's happening now because it's on the plan and there's the structure. This is supposed to help you. But actually, you were describing, that kind of like, well, I'm not going to do what you say unless I've got a really great relationship with you. And even then, who says you get to decide? That's what happens next.
Yeah, I think in some situations, structure is really, really important. And the reason for that is one of the main causes for anxiety in autistic people is uncertainty. So what happens is if you have a bit of information missing, it's a bit like having a puzzle and you have one piece left of a puzzle and you can't fill it no matter what. And then because that puzzle needs to be filled, your brain comes up with the worst possible scenarios of what might or could happen. So if you have a set structure, exactly what's going to happen, that gets rid of all the uncertainty so you don't feel anxious. The alternative to that is when you're in the right sort of environment, or exactly, for example, if you've worked together on what you can do if things go wrong, that's then your structure for when things aren't going so well. It's about having structure in, I guess it's a bit like sort of troubleshooting in a way. So for me, the way I see forest school is sort of open-ended and child-led, and sort of anything can happen really, but you still have those bits of structure for when you need it. So
like systems, I guess.
They're
Yes.
flow charts in my head. It's where, you know, I'm going, well, it'll go one of 2 or 3 ways, and I'm happy with those 2 or 3 ways, and then from there it'll be one of those 2 ways.
I mean, my way of seeing it is it's a safety net. The level of structure that people need is very individual as well. So if some people are more anxious, they might need it to be more structured, but it's their structure. It's not my structure, and people can deviate from that structure whenever they want to. It's just there as a safety net, really, to help. Often, for some people with anxiety, for other people like to just follow quite a set thing. Some people like sameness, but they like it. It's up to the person whether they stick to it or not. I'm very happy when people deviate from it. Do you know what I mean? And find other things to do, and their interest goes out, and they follow their interest. I mean, that's what I ideally want to happen. I want people to be following what they're interested in, and actually engaging with the woods or with the people in the woods.
And a good example of that sort of safety net is, so before lockdown, I used to run meetup groups for autistic people in a board game shop. And we have this thing called a traffic light system, which is where you have a green, yellow or red sticker. If you put on a red sticker, it means you don't want anyone to interact with you. If you have a yellow sticker, only people you've interacted with first can chat with you. If you have a green sticker, that means everyone can come and talk to you and do whatever they like. After putting that system in place, lots of people have come along to the group, but a lot of people have said they wouldn't have come along without the traffic light system because it reduces their anxiety enough to attend. The other interesting thing is every person who's ever attended except one has always had a green sticker on. It's just having that safety net and that backup thing is what has allowed them to feel comfortable enough to then come along. And the board game group is very open-ended. People go along, get any board game they want, play with anyone. There's no structure whatsoever, but it's having that safety net and that backup option for when things aren't going well. That's really important.
That's really interesting. And I think that is, you guys have both just, made the difference, defined that word structure in a way. Whereas I think, as I said, a lot of kind of superficial bits of advice that you might receive about making your sessions inclusive would just have that word structure without that explanation. And so a lot of people
would say structure and be synonymous with timings. I think
yes,
that would be what people are conflating, but actually structure isn't the same as timing.
And actually, I've heard that timing is actually very stressful for a lot of people. If you say, well, this has got to happen at 10 o'clock and you've written that on a plan, it's like, actually that isn't helpful.
Or even the again, it's one of those pieces of advice that is either going to be great for someone or awful for someone, which is when they say, give someone a 5-minute reminder that there's about to be a transition, and then a 2-minute reminder that there's about to be a transition. And, because for some people, I've had some learners where that's great. They can go, oh, okay, I can start to wind stuff down. I've had other learners where as soon as you start giving them reminders, they stop enjoying whatever the activity was, because now we've got a transition in 5 minutes. And now they've just got 5 minutes of anxiety, You
can often create a kind of natural transition though. For instance, if you were, sawing up some wood, you could say, right, we've got these 5 lengths of wood which we're going to saw up, and when they're finished, then it's time to go on to the next activity, and then you've got a clear beginning and end, and that can help that transition without necessarily having to say there's 5 minutes. And for some people, their sense of time isn't very good. For children generally, and for any of us, particularly if we're very absorbed in something, our sense of time, we kind of lose our sense of time if we're very, very focused and enjoying what we're doing. So sometimes, to help with the transition, if possible, it depends obviously what someone's doing. It can be, right, we're going to collect some wood for the fire. I want you to get 10 more sticks, and then that's all the wood we need to get. And then there's a very clear kind of end to what's happening.
Oh, and then you get that kid that's not going home, so they only get 9 sticks, and then they walk around for 15 minutes going, I've only got 9, I don't have to go home yet, I've only got 9.
Well, then they've outwitted you. And they're kind of self-advocating and learning really quite useful life skills.
Loopholes, damn loopholes.
I think the best. I think if a good example for that sort of countdown thing and why it doesn't always work that well is for people who play online gaming. For example, I play lots and lots of Fortnite. If I was given a 10-minute timer at the start of a game, I wouldn't be able to cope with that, because Fortnite games can be up to 20 minutes and you don't know when it's going to end. So it's much better to say it's time to finish after this game, because then you still have the time to sort of decompress and get ready for the next activity. But it's also not going to be cut short, because no warning doesn't work well, but also being cut off before you're ready also doesn't work well either. So it's about sort of knowing the activity you're doing really well and working out what, I don't know. so you have a timing in your head, but you fit the activity around the timing when it's time to come to an end, if that makes sense.
We've talked before. Have you guys seen the doodle? And I'm so sorry to whoever did this doodle, because it's incredible and I'm not crediting them properly. But it's about tendrils coming out from their mind. Have you guys seen this one?
Yeah.
If I am, Andy's saying yes, Michael shaking his head. So it's all these thought tendrils, and it's saying that if I am allowed to, they can that's all their thoughts, and they're aware of the bird noise, engagements, and all these things. And done properly, they can wind all those engagements back in. But if there's a sharp transition, it's a bit like being ripped, and all of those connections are being ripped out of their head. Just because I'm conscious of time, guys, is there anything that you think we should have asked you about that we haven't covered yet? Any topics that you think that I really wish they had asked me about, that I wanted to talk about that? Have we nailed it?
Yeah. I think it'd be interesting. I'm interested in what the Forest School kind of association or the Forest School practitioners can do as a community to kind of share practice, really, and also bring autistic people into the centre of the conversation, most importantly, really, because it seems to be something that people want to know about.
Yeah.
It does, whenever I've done workshops at the conference, so generally, I say, I can cope with about 10 people, and there'll be about 18 or something at each one. I really liked it this year, because basically I got my ticket, and Andy and the guys from Stay Up Late did all the talking, so I was really happy, because normally I get really, even before I came to talk to you today, for about an hour before, I get really, really nervous. And when I do workshops, I get really nervous as well before I do them. If anyone's seen me, I'm like a nervous wreck around the time I'm going to chat to everybody. But yeah, there's a lot of interest in it, and I think it'd be good if the FSA and kind of the autistic community came together to try to share practice, and just to help those people who are Forest School practitioners who might not know anything about issues around transitioning between activities and some of the things we've talked about.
Yeah, I think that would be amazing, and that's actually one of the things I wanted to ask you about your training, and I wondered whether you had been involved in any Forest School leader training, because I know you've done kind of standalone things, and you've done obviously stuff at the Forest School Association conference, and you've done days in particular Forest School places. Have you ever been involved in any Forest School leader training? Have you ever been invited in to?
I was going to do some work with Sarah Lawful. I don't know if it's going to happen now because of lockdown. Sarah was planning, I think there were three, I think it was me and John Cree, and then it was either Sarah or somebody else. There was going to be 3 kind of workshops going on. And that was part of a kind of bigger bit of training. My life's quite busy with kind of family commitments and stuff. And so I do my sessions, and I do a couple of support shifts every week for a man that I've known for a long time. I'm going to go off actually after I chat to you. I'm going to go to his house, and I'm staying over there tonight, supporting him. So I don't really, I don't know, I'm not very career minded.
Is it something you would like to see? Would you like to see the profile of autism? Yeah.
I think so. That's sort of what my thought process was through the stuff I've been reading recently, including your book. Is sort of like, well, this does it does come up when you're a forest school practitioner, because we are working with such a, we're working with the whole cross section of society, and that's going to include autistic people, and it should be there in the training. I think in the very first.
I think Andy probably does more workshops than me, because he talks at the Therapeutic Forest about autism. They're called this.
Oh,
Michael, I think you've misheard their question. So their question was about the actual forest school leader training that people go on to qualify as a forest school leader. Should more autism training come into that? I think that was your question, wasn't it?
Yeah.
But,
yeah. Given the amount of autistic people who are involved in forest school at all different levels, it's not only like I said earlier. You also may have, a parent or a teacher that you're partnership working with who is autistic, and their child is neurotypical. So I think it's kind of, yeah. Sorry, I'm not very good at that.
I think for me personally, so if you look at the world as a whole, 20% of the world's population is neurodivergent, whether it's autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia. So you're going to come across them all, whether you like it or not. So I think it would be really, really useful to understand how those different brain types work and how to offer better support to them as well. But,
yeah. Absolutely.
I mean, I don't know whether it necessarily has to be part of your leader training or kind of CPD, in the same way as we go and do our first aid training and what have you. I certainly think it's something everyone should try to educate themselves about if they can.
Do you think it is something closer to first aid where it needs topping up? Are the understandings of autism still moving at a rate at which a doctor would retrain?
The definition of what autism is changes regularly over the years that I've worked with autism. And when I first started, we were given a lot of training about things like the triad of impairment, but we weren't really trained about sensory issues, which were a massive part of my work now. So it's a constantly evolving thing. It's like forest school. It's one of those, if you ever become interested in something which has any real depth, in the same way as like, you get interested in forest school, that takes you all over the place, doesn't it? There's so many different ideas involved in it. And it's the same if you become interested in autism. If you'd spoken to me when I'd been a support worker for 6 months, I probably would have thought I knew all about autism. 20 years later, I don't know anything about it. I'm constantly learning, in the same way as I'm constantly learning about forest school.
And Andy, is that something you're pushing for with your advocacy, that people need to keep that what they thought they knew isn't relevant, or not, and isn't accurate anymore?
I think there's a lot of inaccuracies, but I think the main thing I push isn't really all the facts about autism, but more sort of their approach and their belief system, if that makes sense. Like I said, I really believe in acceptance. It's not about sort of fitting in a box. It's that person's stuck up, whether you like it or not. So you might as well try to enjoy it, if that makes sense. Obviously, people have their weaknesses and individual strengths and weaknesses. Some of those you can work on, can change, but some of those are intrinsic to people as autistic people. So even if it's something that you really hate about someone, there's nothing you can do about it. So acceptance, for me, is the right approach. So that's what I really push for. It's a sort of inside out, child-led approach. There's things like the low arousal approach and stuff like that, which you may have heard of. And that's I believe in the approach rather than just giving lots of facts, if that makes sense. I know lots of people who've been on autism training and we don't remember a single thing from it. Whereas once you get that perspective shift and you shift towards acceptance, I think that's a switch which lasts forever and has a massive impact. It's just helping people to switch your perspective a bit, if that makes sense.
That's really well put. And do you think that there's more to access that's actually produced by autistic people, or do you think that's always been there, or is it that more autistic people are finding platforms and ways of communicating their own life experiences, as opposed to, as you're describing, kind of like, I'm going on formal autism training run by specialists? It's actually first-hand autistic people speaking about their experiences. Is that increasing, do you think?
Yeah, I think there's lots. So there's Neuroclastic, which you mentioned before, which has a massive loads of members. There's also online a group called the Autistic Cooperative, which is a group of autistic advocates who do sort of campaigns and education on social media and things like that. Yeah, for me, I have quite a simple perspective. I think there's absolutely loads out there about autism. There's thousands of books you can read. There's so much you can learn. I don't know, I feel like the main thing is sort of motivating people to want to learn more and that perspective shift, because, I don't know, yeah, you can just read a book if you really wanted to learn about it. So the first step is helping people want to learn about it, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Brilliant. Wow, I think that's a really good place to finish. Thank you so much, you guys, for your time. That's been really great.
Just before we go, could you remind people where, because there's lots of stuff that Andy, I really wanted to talk to you about Spectrum Gaming, and we kind of ran out of time.
Mention Spectrum Gaming. That's a brilliant thing that Andy's doing.
Go on, give us the elevator quickly before we go.
So like I said, I run an online sort of support groups for autistic adults online, and it's quite interesting because a lot of people love gaming and that sort of stuff. The problem is, because you game at home, you never get a chance to meet other people who also like gaming. So it's just setting up a sort of online community for autistic gamers, so people can make new friends, meet others who have the same interests. But also we want to create a bit of a YouTube channel, so we can also share content with people, so people can enjoy the gaming side, but also learn a bit about autism at the same time. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, fantastic.
Oh, hang on. I was going to plug something as well for someone, actually.
Please,
Go on.
plug,
Michael, do it.
It's Dr. Anna Stenning, who I think she was at Bath Spa Uni. She's moving to Leeds Uni. I've put the link up on I put it up on the Forest School Southwest page.
We can put it in the podcast notes. Yeah,
she's just starting a blog about autism, nature and culture, which is really, really interesting, and which I'd highly recommend people having a look at and getting involved with Anna's work. Very interesting work she's doing.
Fantastic. Yeah, we'll link to that. Brilliant. And if you guys think of anything in the meantime, just ping us a message and we'll add it on the show notes.
Thank you very much for letting us come and chat about autism. And I love the podcast anyway. But yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for joining us. Thanks, Andy, as well.
Thank you.
All right, have a good evening, guys. Bye.
Bye. Ladies and gentlemen.
If you like this podcast and want to support more episodes, you can donate through Patreon. Visit patreon.com/Children of the Forest to show your support for the Forest School podcast.